Glad you're all here. My name's Eric, and excited about the topic we get into today. We're in this series called Best Life Ever, and if you've missed the premise of it, I'll just give it to you real quick here. When we look at the life that Jesus described for us, like the life that he came to bring us, and we compare that life with the life that the average person is living, we notice that there's a really big gap. Like, the reality is very few people are experiencing their best life ever. Maybe you even, for instance, have moments of it where you're like, oh, that was a great experience, or I'm doing so well in this one area of my life. But the reality is for most of us, there's other areas that just quite aren't where we believe they could be. And so the invitation of the series is, how can you and I step in and actually experience the fullness of life, the best life that we were created to live, the life that Jesus came to give us? And one of the ways we said in week one that we do that is by learning to think differently. We have to change our mindsets and embrace new mindsets, biblical mindsets that lead us to the kind of life that we were created to live. So now in this series, every week, we're looking at a different mindset and kind of discovering what we can as we go. So today's going to be a fun one. Some of you, I'll just tell you now, you're already crushing this one. Like, you should be up here teaching this, not me, honestly. And so for some of us, today's going to be like a reminder and encouragement, but it's not going to push us extremely hard. Others of us, today's really going to push us uncomfortably hard. And it's going to challenge some assumptions we make about life and about what our worth is all about and where that gets expressed. And if that's the case, I'm glad you're here. This is a lesson I'm still learning in my life. I had a great example this week that reminded me why this topic is so important. So I had a chance, my wife Nicole and I had a chance to go to Springfield, Missouri this last week for a very, very short trip. Actually, the trip in and of itself kind of makes my point. We left Spokane, we flew all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, East Coast time, then flew to Springfield. We're there for just barely 24 hours, got back on a plane, flew back to Atlanta, all the way back to Spokane, drove home. We did all of that in 48 hours, right? Like, the world is so small, isn't it? Like, coast to coast like that, got to knock a trip out, we got to be there, we got to get it done, go, 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 go. What I love so much about flying is you get put in environments where you just realize that this world is chaotic. Like, anybody ever been to the Atlanta airport before besides me? Probably one of the busiest airports around. And I have this thing, I always say this in airports, Nicole's tired of it, but I'm so shocked every time. I always say, we're walking down through the terminal, it's chaos. And I said to Nicole, where are all these people going? Like, I know we have somewhere we're supposed to go, but clearly they're just killing time. Like, there's no way that many people at the same time in one airport are trying to get somewhere, right? But if you travel a lot, you know this to be true. And there's intersections where you go from one terminal to the next. The trains are so tight. It's like, and we're all moving quick, right? We're trying to find the fastest line. Where can I get the quickest breakfast burrito before I got to get back on the plane? I'm in the line for the bathroom. There's 5 guys in the bathroom. I kid you not, a guy comes in behind me. He looks down the line of 5 and he goes, I don't have time for this. And turns around and he leaves. And I'm thinking, you will regret that in 30 minutes when that plane is stuck on the tarmac. I don't have time for that. I got to go, 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 go. We get to the terminal, we sit down, we have a few minutes to breathe before we get on our next flight. And at one point, I look around, and this is no surprise, every single person I see is doing what? They're on their phones. The whole time. I mean, we're captured. If it's not a phone, it's a laptop. If it's not a laptop, it's an Apple Watch. I mean, like, there's TVs. Nobody's looking at the TVs because we've all got our own thing. We're just fully consumed. We get on the airplane, and this particular airline carrier announces that they have, get this, free Wi-Fi. It was like we all won the lottery. People are like, yes! They're like chanting the name of the airline carrier. Like, people are so excited. People are downloading it as quick as possible. And they're like, we're back on our phones. Nicole kept telling me, stop looking, but I couldn't help. The gal next to me across the aisle, I was kind of snooping. I didn't mean to, but I got sucked in. She was on her phone once she got her free internet, and we're up in the airplane flying, and she was like scrolling through her social medias with the speed of a cheetah. I have never seen a thumb move that fast in my life. Like, from one app to the next. I mean, she's going through multiple channels, multiple, devices, not devices, but different, she's on Instagram, and she's over TikTok, and she's like, boom, 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 and she's clicking on things, and she's keeping up with the world. And I'm like getting nauseous just watching her screen. Chaos. Our world is out of control. Would you agree? And we don't just have to go to an airport to be reminded of this. I mean, it seems like it all kind of comes together in this moment. But this world is moving quite quickly. I would say it this way, kind of a summary statement. This is one of my convictions about life, and I think sets up the pace for where we're going today. Life pushes us to run at a pace that we were not designed to sustain. I mean, just life itself is like go, 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 go. And the reality is your designer, we talked about this a few weeks ago, designed you with a purpose. And it wasn't to go, 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 go. It was to go at times. But sometimes instead of going, we're supposed to be practicing slowing. Don't always go, sometimes slow. That rhymes. I just came up with that. That's neat. and so this is where we live. And I would say this, your best life ever will never be experienced if you are running through life full tilt. It's just not going to happen. And I don't think you need me to tell you that. Maybe I'm reminding you of what you already know intuitively. Whether we practice it or not, that's a different story. We just weren't designed to run that way. And so that becomes an issue for us because the most important things in life, the best things in your life and in mine don't happen at full tilt. They happen in what we sometimes call the margins. Like that space, the extra. Right? Margin. We read a book. The words don't go all the way to the edge of the paper, do they? No, there's space. Margin is the gap between what I could do and what I choose to do. I could, but I'm going to say, and there's a space we create. That is where the best things in life happen. The most important relationships in life happen. The experiences that are the most meaningful and significant. That's where service and selflessness and gratitude happen, is in the margin. And so I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about rest, and I think the title of my talk is my mindset, and that is that rest is a gift. Remember when mom and dad told you to take a nap as a kid? You're like, no, why do you hate me? Rest? Now we're like, would anybody like to be commanded by someone with authority to take a nap, right? We're like, oh. And what we're trying to help our kids understand is this isn't just a have to, this is a gift to you. You're gonna appreciate this later. We grow up and we forget that. So if you'll just say the word rest with me, rest. Say it restfully though, rest. When's the last time you purposely, intentionally breathed? Like you've been breathing all morning, but like, just try it with me. Just slow down, just take a breath, a nice deep one. Your smiles are big right now. Rest, slowing, it is a gift. You don't have to turn there, but in Genesis chapter 1, I'll just give you a couple verses. I'm going to do some setup. It's not a biblical survey today, so quite a bit of that to get us to our primary teaching passage. Genesis chapter 1, read the story of creation. God, the creator, our designer, creates the heavens and the earth. You know, the stars and the planets, the plants and the trees, animals, humanity, all of it's good. He's on a roll. I mean, he's crushing it. And he goes for 6 days. And then in Genesis chapter 2, we get to the seventh day, and I want to show us what it says about God's creative work. It says, so the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. So on the seventh day, God, go back one. Patience. We'll get there. Rest. There it is. Thank you, Gloria. On the seventh day, God finished his work of creation, and so he, what's it say? Rested. He started another project? He checked his email? No, he rested from all his work. Verse 3. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. This verse, like every other verse in the Bible, is not here by accident. Like it's not an accident that there's an inclusion in the creation story of God hitting pause and resting. And of all the days he calls holy and he blesses, it wasn't day 4 when he created the stars and the galaxies. By the way, was that an epic day or what? I mean, we see pictures of that. What a day to bless and call holy. No, that's not it. It wasn't day 6 when he created his prized possession, humanity. You and I are here today because of day 6. That's a day that should be blessed and called holy. No, he picks day 7, a day when he did what? Nothing. Back to verse 2. Here's what it says about the seventh day. It says, on the seventh day, God finished his work of creation, and so he rested from his work. He counted rest good enough to include in one of the days and to call it blessed and holy. Like this is what God does. He sets space aside to just be. He had created. But then he says, no, now I'm going to stop. And let's just take some time. The word rested that we read here, it's a Hebrew, the original language of Genesis is Hebrew, and the word for rested, if you translate it directly, is the word Shabbat. Everybody say Shabbat. Shabbat. Most of the world wouldn't know what the word Shabbat is, except for this show called The Chosen came along, so now everybody knows what Shabbat is. But the word Shabbat literally is translated stop, cease. When I think of Shabbat, I think of being in school, taking a time test, and I got to the end of my time, and if I wasn't done with the test, the teacher would say, stop, pencils down. Like it's over. You can't do any more work. If you were in Hebrew class, they would have said, Shabbat, stop, cease. Your hand can no longer work. It's over. That word Shabbat is where we get our English word Sabbath. That's where the word Sabbath comes from. Shop. I combine words there. Stop. Shabbat. Cease. This is an interesting insight. So the book of Genesis, the entire book, first book of the Bible, was given to us for many, many reasons. One of the primary, I would say the primary reason that we have the book of Genesis is the book of Genesis reveals to you and me this creator, this designer, God, that gave us life and existence. It helps us understand God's character and his design and his intention and his motives and his purposes. And so one of the things that we learn from Genesis about our creator God is that he values, he calls blessed and holy, rest. It is not a have to, it is a get to. He sees it as a gift, something that he enjoyed and experienced and participated in, and then he later would invite us into. So let's jump ahead a little bit. We're going to go to the book of Exodus chapter 20. In Exodus 20, we read the 10 Commandments. Maybe you've heard of the 10 Commandments before. These 10 big statements. A few weeks ago, I said that the 10 Commandments aren't conditions of our relationship with God. They're confirmation of our relationship, right? They say this is what it means to be the people of God. This is how you live out your relationship with God. And the fourth of the commandments, there's some pretty big ones. Stuff like don't murder, don't steal. Like these are really important ones. The fourth one, though, it's almost like he snuck in the middle and we don't see it coming. Look what he says about the commandment number 4. He says, remember to observe the Sabbath day, the rest day, the cease day, the stop day, by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. That's pretty important language. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. Verse 11 tells us why. Here's the why of this commandment. It says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he Shabbated. He Sabbathed. He rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Like he practiced this exercise of rest. He created, and then he ceased. He worked, and then he rested. And one of the reasons why he gave us the gift of Sabbath, it wasn't just something he did for himself, but he commanded it of us, his people, specifically to the people of Israel, but there's an implication for us as well, as his creation, was that by resting, we actually participate in the exercise of the divine. We actually follow the pattern of God by entering into this pattern of work and rest, production and just being. That rest, Sabbath, is actually one of the ways that you and I express the image of God in our lives. This is part of how that happens. That's profound. Like it's God's mark on us. That in the same way that he worked and then rested, we do the same. And we're reminded in that moment that rest is blessed and holy. And that it is a gift for me to embrace with gratitude and with joy. Now, we think of the 10 Commandments generally as coming from the book of Exodus, but there's a second time in the Old Testament where the 10 Commandments are recorded, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Same 10 Commandments, and yet some of the language shifts a little bit. Let's go there to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12, and see if this sounds familiar. Commandment number 4 again says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. So far, that's almost verbatim what came from Exodus. But now look at the reason, the motive, the why. He says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. That's interesting. So the first reading of the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, tells us the why, which is by resting, by Sabbathing, you actually participate in the divine process. You follow God's pattern of work and rest, of creation and ceasing. Now, we're told that the why behind this commandment has a second reason, not a new reason, but it's an additional reason. And it was given to the people of Israel as a reminder of the time when God, by his strong arm and mighty hand, led them out of slavery from Egypt. And he gave them freedom. We weren't there, but I think we can all imagine there was no rest in Egypt if you were a slave. I think we can understand this, right? You ran 7 days a week, it's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And you went as hard as your slave drivers with their whips and their brutal force would want you to work. They set the pace. There was no rest. All they had known as a nation for 400 years was a life without rest, without any sort of stopping or ceasing. And then God stood up, he rose against Egypt, and he led the people through Moses out of Egypt into freedom. And so he said, I want you to take a day every week and remember what I did for you. And on that day, you're not going to work. It's a gift to you. You used to have to work 7 days a week just to survive, to keep alive, no longer. You're going to work 6, that's fine. But on that 7th day, it's my day. And you're going to slow down, you're going to be, and you're going to remember what I did for you. I purchased your freedom. And here we are all these years later. I just don't know if much has changed for us. By God's grace, we don't live as slaves to Egypt or any other country. But don't we do a pretty good job of enslaving ourselves all the time to things? I mean, nobody else is enslaving us. They don't need to. We're doing just fine ourselves. We got that covered. And there's lots of things that we enslave ourselves to. Let's just focus on the things related to our topic today, right? We slave ourselves to productivity and accomplishment and more. Like whatever more means, like we got to get more of it. And we just have this sense of I got to go. And I got work and I got production and I got output and I got to hit my standards or somebody else's standards they've set for me. And we literally enslave ourselves to this sense. In contrast, Jesus is like, I came to buy you freedom from all things. And one of the ways that you exercise that freedom is you take time to stop and just be. And in that space of stopping, relationship with me happens, relationship with others, relationship with yourself, your body, your heart, your mind come into focus. This is a gift I've given you. Don't enslave yourself. This is the gift we've been given. He says, I'm going to give you a pattern of 7 in your life. Here's a pattern of 7 that you're going to practice. And that wasn't just like the pattern of 7 wasn't like a one-time thing, right? There was actually multiple layers. So we see this all throughout the Bible. Like, first of all, every 7 days, God gave us the pattern of the Sabbath day. That was the first one he gave us. There's the pattern of the Sabbath day. So you work 6 days, 7th day you rest. 6 more days, the 7th you rest. It's a weekly reminder. But that wasn't it. There was also a 7-year pattern called the Sabbath year. And on this particular year, because this was a very agrarian society, right? This is how they survived. They grew their own food. What God had said is you can till the soil for 6 years, but on the 7th year, that field has to lay fallow. You don't plant it, you don't cultivate it, you don't harvest from it. You give the land rest, right? This is my creation. I didn't design any of my creation, human or even the earth, to produce without at some point pausing and stopping and resting. And so you give the land space. And God would say to them, I will give you, trust me, I will give you enough in year 6. Your harvest will be so great, you'll have enough to sustain you through year 7. So just trust me. I'll produce for you. I'll sustain you. You don't have to do it. You give me 6, I'll give you the 7th. And then there was one more, which is a pattern of every 49 years. And so 49 would be 7 times. Yeah, kind of, you're good at math too. 49 years, there was this thing called the year of Jubilee, or kind of like the Sabbath Jubilee. And this is absolutely crazy, by the way. This is bonkers, crazy idea. The idea of the Jubilee was everything reset to 0 on the year of Jubilee. So if you owned debt on a property, your debt would be erased. How many of you would like a year of Jubilee right now in your life? You're like, come on, Jesus, bring it back, right? So your debt is erased. If you were a slave, you would be set free in the year of Jubilee. So slaves were given their freedom. If you had sold a piece of property to someone, or even if you had bought property from someone, the property would be given back to its original owner in the year of Jubilee. And so it was this way where God would just sort of flatten the economic scale for the entire country. There's no haves and have-nots. The entire nation would be basically brought back to the same place. Every 49 years, it would start this pattern and this cycle over again. Now, interestingly, in my studies this week, I thought this was the case. I looked into it. There's no biblical record of the people of Israel ever practicing the year of Jubilee. It was given to them early in the Old Testament. I'm not saying they didn't practice it. All I'm saying is there's no biblical account, which is interesting because it was such an important part of their society. So we don't really know if they practiced the every 49 years or not because the Bible's silent about it. But the Bible does speak to the every 7 days and the every 7 years. And so that sets all of us up for the passage I want to go to. If you have a Bible, turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Let me give you the background on Chronicles, the book of Chronicles. The book of Chronicles, did you get that? It follows the story of the people of Israel for a long period of time where they went through a very, very difficult run. And so the entire book tells the story of all of these kings that would come to power. They went through a ton of kings. I mean, it was a disaster how often kings came to power, would lead for a little bit, and then they would lose their power, they would die, or they'd be taken out by some sort of enemy. And most of the kings were evil kings. They weren't good kings. If my math's correct, about every 4 bad kings led to 1 good king. So a ratio of 4 to 1, bad to good. And as is true in all of life, as the king goes, so goes the nation. As the parents go, so goes the family. And in business, as a leader goes, or even the church or schools, like as leadership goes, generally the people tend to follow. And that's exactly what happened to the people of Israel. They found themselves in a very, very difficult spot, and it led to a pretty sad outcome. So let's jump in. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 14 starts this way. It says, likewise, here's my point. All the leaders of the priests and the people became more and more unfaithful. Started at the top, flowed throughout the entire nation. They followed all the pagan practices of the surrounding nations, desecrating the temple of the Lord that had been consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, repeatedly sent his prophets to warn them. By the way, one of the key prophets was Jeremiah, who stood up and called the people to repentance and to come back and follow God, trust him, obey his commands, honoring the Sabbath and the Sabbath year. His prophets warned them, for he had compassion on his people and his temple. So he tried to give them some guidance. But the people mocked these messengers of God and despised their words. They scoffed at the prophets until the Lord's anger could no longer be restrained and nothing could be done. Here's what happens. So the Lord brought the king of Babylon against them. The Lord did it. The Babylonians killed Judah's young men, even chasing after them into the temple. They had no pity on the people, killing both young men and young women, the old and the infirm. God handed all of them over to Nebuchadnezzar. The king took home to Babylon all the articles, large and small, used in the temple of God, and the treasures from both the Lord's temple and from the palace of the king and his officials. Then his army burned the temple of God, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, burned all the palaces, and completely destroyed everything of value. The few who survived were taken as exiles to Babylon, and they became servants to the king and his sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. Wow. That's a lot. A tough run. For 70 years, the people of Israel would be enslaved to the Babylonians. We hear about Nebuchadnezzar. This is a story of, if you read the Old Testament story of Daniel, this would be when this would happen, during the time of the Babylonians. And they would be oppressed for 70 years, living in exile. Eventually, as it alluded to there at the very end, the kingdom of Persia would rise up as a superpower, would go to war against Babylon and overthrow them. And when Persia overthrew the Babylonians, they received not only all of Babylon's wealth, but all of its people, including its exiles. And it's those that had lived under Babylonian rule now became subjected to the rule of the Persians. And that went on for hundreds of years. Until eventually, if you know history, the Romans came to power. And the Romans would then go to battle against the Persians and overthrow the Persians. And even at the time of Jesus in the first century, we understand that Rome was in power and was occupying and ruling over the people of Israel and their land. It was a mess. Once again, they were enslaved. The freedom that God had purchased them, represented by a Sabbath day, a Sabbath year, was gone. It had been taken from them. During the time of the Persians, there was a season where one of the kings, I think his name is King Darius, actually allowed some of the exiles to go back to Jerusalem and begin rebuilding the temple and the wall. And we read about that in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. But even there, they weren't free. They still served the Persian king and his rulers. They just never had their freedom again. Matter of fact, Israel would never have a human king sit on the throne again. It was the end of that around 500 BC, and it's continued to this day. A horrible, horrible description of what happened. And yet what I find most insightful about all of that is the verse we haven't read yet. Verse 21, where the author of Chronicles tries to summarize like the primary emphasis of everything that has happened. Right? This is like the last couple of verses of his story, 36 chapters worth. And look what he says in verse 21. He says, so the message of the Lord spoken through Jeremiah was fulfilled. Here it is. The land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest. That's the application. That the land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest, lying desolate until the 70 years were fulfilled, just as the prophet was Jeremiah, had said. I mean, just to remind us what had happened. Young men and women brutally killed, the old, the sick, murdered without any mercy. The temple of God completely ransacked, desecrated, and demolished. The walls of Jerusalem torn down. The palace and all of its surrounding buildings just burned to the ground. Anyone who survived, they're hauled off as exiles, and now they're forced to serve as slaves. I mean, what a horrible experience for the people of Israel. And yet the summary of all of it is that the land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest. Wow. You know, it was obvious that for a season, if you go back in history, the people of Israel practiced the Sabbath. They practiced the Sabbath year. We don't know about Jubilee, but this every 7-year cycle at some point was a part of their rhythm and their routine as a nation. But we also realize, it's very obvious from the reading today, that at some point they stopped. At some point they made a decision, conscious or not, I don't know, where they thought to themselves, you know, the land's doing pretty good. I wonder if we worked next year instead of take the year off, I think we could probably even do better, and we're growing. And so they decided, rather than trusting God to provide for them in year 7, ultimately what they said was, why don't we just trust ourselves? We'll take care of it. And they began to extract more from the land. And we don't know how long this went on, where they began to extract and consume from God's creation. And God's like, no, the land needs rest. The land needs rest. My creation needs rest. If you're not going to give it, I might have to. And they just kept consuming. And by the way, that's the whole point of the Sabbath. It's ultimately an issue of trust. And it hasn't changed for you and I today. Well, I can do a lot if I have 7 days. And God says, no, just give me 6. Let me take care of the 7th. I'll do more with your 6 than you could ever possibly do in 7. It's the same with our finances, by the way. We approach it like, well, if I want to keep all this for me, God says, no. If you just trust me and give it all to me, I'll do more with what you give me than you could ever do with what you hold on to your greedy little hands. It's an issue of trust. It was then, and it is for us now, when we feel this need to produce and work and just go. We no longer trust God. And at some point, it all breaks down. And the land needed to get what it needed, rest. And it came at a high price for the people of Israel. We'll say it this way. I read this line this week, and I thought this is so good. Here's the point. If you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will take you. You don't take a Sabbath, eventually the Sabbath will take you. Israelites didn't give the land a Sabbath. Eventually God said, I got to give my creation what it needs. My creation is not intended to just consume. And by the way, nor are you. We forget that. We think it's all about how much can I get done? How fast can I run? Man, you all know the Energizer Bunny? You know what the Energizer Bunny does? It keeps what? Going. Newsflash, it doesn't. The bunny died a long time ago, right? We all know that to be true. The whole thing is hilarious. Like, nothing goes. At some point, the battery dies. Your car eventually will run out of gas. If you have an electric car, the battery will eventually die, and so will yours. Like things aren't created to last forever. They've got some sort of a shelf life. And by God's grace, he put in us an ability to sort of medicate from a rest perspective. We can actually rest and calm our spirits and rejuvenate our bodies. And we're able to get up the next day. That's what sleep is in part. And we go back into our day. And if we eat well and we take care of ourselves and we take breaks and we Sabbath, we can last a long, long time. None of us are going to last forever. But the Energizer Bunny thing, forget it, people. Like it's gone. You weren't made to just produce. That is not the most important thing about you. At some point, God says, will you just cease? Will you stop and just be? And in that being, would you experience the fullness of life I came to bring you? Again, relationship happens there. Relationship with God, relationship with ourselves, self-knowledge, relationship with one another. It happens when we slow down and we just breathe. And this is hard for some of us. Some of us grew up in an environment, and maybe this is true for you. And a little bit of this is true for me. For those of us that grew up in a legalistic environment, like a religious, legalistic environment, there are some of us here, it's like Sabbath was just like, you do it or the Babylonians are going to get you. Like, they're coming. They're hungry. There's this like threat, right? Like if we don't just go, and that something's going to happen to us in life, that's the world tells us. And then so this response is the church like, no. You just have to Sabbath and you're not allowed to do this or that and don't break this rule. And all these restrictions are put on us. And so now even the idea of slowing down or Sabbathing, that word, like, it brings back my PTSD from our childhood. Let me just remind us that Sabbath is not, it's not a have to, it is a get to. The idea of rest is a gift given to us by our Creator. And I love what Jesus says. If we go to Mark chapter 2, like skip way ahead and out of the New Testament, here's how Jesus summarizes the whole conversation where some of the religious Jewish leaders were challenging his understanding of the Sabbath. And he simply said to them, he said, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. What is Jesus saying? The same thing that God said from the very beginning. It is a gift given to you to enjoy. And if you will practice it well, you will, first of all, you will embrace the divine mark of God in you. You will celebrate the image of God in this divine pattern of work and rest. If you will practice Sabbath, you will be reminded that I, as your God, have provided you freedom from slavery. Whether it's a foreign nation like it was to the people of Israel, or freedom from slavery to production and this sense of I have to make it work and I have to go. He said, I'll just free you from that. It's a gift for you to be embraced. This is hard for some of us. I'm the kind of guy, I'm stuck in this as well. I'm still learning this one. I'm so much better than I used to be when it comes to this. Early in our marriage, I've told you this before if you've been around a while, but I was like, when we first became pastors, Nicole and I were youth pastors for years, I was convinced, like I was the best thing God had going. Like he is so lucky to have me on his team. Because his plans to redeem the world and to share the news of Jesus, he just wasn't going to be able to pull it off if I wasn't on. And so I was convinced, and I say that, and I wish I could tell you I'm joking. Like I was convinced that like God needed me to give everything I had to give as hard as I could. And at the time it was just with students, but that was like, I'm just going to focus on my little world that I've got, and then we'll worry about the world later. We're going to take care of students of the Central Valley of California right now. That's my focus. And I threw myself into that constantly. I worked all the time. And one of my goals for the year was 1997. Or 1996. It's in my Bible, actually, one of my old Bibles. My goal was to spend at least 2 nights home every week. That was my goal. We had babies. Courtney was born. Mitchell was about to be born a little bit later. And I remember around 1998, I came home, and Nicole had both kids. I remember this day, and I feel like if I walked in the door, they were probably crying. And she had a look on her face, and I was like, oh, no. I've been at a youth event having blast, like loving students by playing like laser tag, like serving Jesus. And that night, Nicole just said to me, in love, she just said, we talked about this morning, she says, Eric, I didn't sign up for this. Don't know if this is what you expected marriage was going to be like, but this is not what I signed up for. And so we need to have a talk, and some things need to change. And I realized in that moment, I was pushing too hard, and I had workaholism tendencies, and maybe some of us do. And that was the beginning of me learning I got to dial back and bring some patterns into my life and value the things that mattered most. Now, the tension is still there for me. I mean, I don't struggle with workaholism in that way. I mean, I love to work hard, but I love to play hard as well. But I sometimes, like, when I'm going to rest fast, and I'm going to squeeze as much rest in as possible. You with me? Like, people are all stressed out. I'm like, calm down. We're just having fun, people. And they're like, no one's having fun, Eric. You're stressing us out. There's seasons where I'm like, I'll go to the gym like six days out a week. And Nicole's like, Eric, your body was not designed for that. And I'm like in pain, but I'm like, yeah, but it's fun and it's rest and it's rejuvenating. And I still feel it, this tension of like, I want to go. And I feel like I have to maximize. And so I just need to learn to do what? To Shabbat, to stop, to cease. I'm going to pray that over us. If you just bow your head for a moment, I trust that those of you that know you need this, the Lord's speaking to you. And if you're crushing this already, give him thanks as I pray that he's taught you a lesson here. I bet it came through pain. You didn't learn this on accident and it didn't come easy. You learned it probably through pain. So thank him for the lesson he taught you and ask him to continue to sustain that. But I'm going to pray for those of us that need to hear this today. Jesus, thank you for this message. Thank you for this example that you give us in the scriptures of always pulling away from the crowds. There was always more people to heal. There was always another talk to deliver, another sermon. There was always another miracle that needed to be performed, but you routinely pulled away and rested. You cared for yourself, so you had a deep well to give from. May we learn from that example. May we not make the same mistake that your people of Israel made when they stopped trusting in you, instead trusting themselves, and brought pain upon themselves because they didn't create space for themselves or for your creation to rest. There's a metaphor there for us to apply to our own lives, and I pray that those of us that hear it today would be thoughtful about what today looks like. I pray that we would be thoughtful about what this week looks like, and there would even be conversations at home, in our small groups with friends, about what it means for us to step in and be people who value and celebrate the divine mark on us by resting. It is blessed and it is holy. And we need your help to live into that. Jesus, we thank you for the freedom you purchased us through your death on the cross, the new life that we have, and we want to live into that life, the best possible life ever, by your strength and spirit. And so guide us that way, we pray. Jesus, thanks for loving us for who we are, not for what we do. We're so grateful for it. In Jesus' name, amen.